September 1944, Eastern France. An isolated German fortress sat on a key road junction. Thick stone walls, artillery positions, machine guns covering every approach. Inside were about 1,500 German troops under a major who had sworn he would never surrender to the Americans. General George S. Patton, commanding the U.S. Third Army, did what he usually did first. He sent an officer under a white flag with a simple message: "Surrender now. Avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Your men will be treated as prisoners of war under Geneva Convention rules." The German major's answer was defiant and dramatic. "Tell General Patton that if he wants this fortress, he'll have to kill me to get it." It sounded heroic, unbreakable, the kind of quote you expect to see in a war movie. Patton's reply was 4 words: "I can arrange that." What happened next was not a drawn-out siege. It was a methodical destruction that lasted less than 12 hours and showed exactly what happens when you dare Patton to do the thing he was already planning to do. The German position was not a line of foxholes. It was a real fortress, one of dozens of old stone forts the French had built in previous centuries. It sat on high ground. It commanded a road junction Patton's supply convoys needed. The walls were thick masonry, the approaches were narrow and covered by interlocking fields of fire. Underground chambers could shelter men from ordinary artillery and mortars. There was even a well for water. On paper, it was formidable. Taking it by frontal assault would be costly. A classic siege could take weeks. The smart Staff College move might be to bypass it, leave a screening force, accept the risk, and keep the advance rolling. But this fortress sat on a critical junction. Leaving it in German hands meant that Third Army's fuel and ammunition would have to move on longer, more vulnerable routes. It was an obstacle, and Patton didn't like obstacles behind his lines. Patton's preference was simple: offer surrender first, not out of softness, but because a surrendered position costs no American casualties and very little time. A fought-over position costs both. So his first message to the German major was standard: surrender. Be treated correctly as prisoners of war. Go to a POW camp, survive the war. The alternative, a fight you cannot win that will cost lives on both sides. The major refused, but his refusal went further than a simple no. He made it personal. He invoked honor, duty, and an oath to never surrender. And he issued a direct challenge to Patton's face: "If you want this fortress, you'll have to kill me to get it." Some commanders might have treated this as an opening gambit. Try another argument. Soften the terms. Prove they weren't butchers by being even more generous. Patton saw it differently. The major had stated his own terms. He wanted to die defending the fortress. Patton decided to grant that wish, efficiently and overwhelmingly. When the messenger returned with the major's defiant quote, Patton's staff expected anger or at least frustration. Maybe he'd order the fortress bypassed and deal with it later. Instead, he was almost matter-of-fact. According to officers present, his attitude was coldly pragmatic. "The major says we have to kill him. Let's not disappoint him." Then he started issuing orders, precise, comprehensive, designed to do exactly what the major had challenged him to do in the shortest possible time. Step 1. Encirclement. First, Patton ordered a complete encirclement, not just blocking 1 or 2 roads, a total seal, no one in or out. If possible, cut any external water supply and telephone lines. The fortress was strong, but the garrison still needed supplies, alerts, and reinforcements. They would get none. Step 2. Artillery second, he ordered every heavy artillery piece within range to register on the fortress. Not random shelling, pre-planned and carefully adjusted fire on specific parts of the walls and interior. Stone walls can stop small arms fire. They do not do well against repeated hits by 155mm shells. Underground chambers protect against fragments. Direct hits on overhead cover collapse them. Step 3. Air power. Third, Patton requested air support, not area bombing. P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers carrying 500-pound bombs and rockets tasked to hit specific targets inside the fortress complex. The Major's command post observed artillery positions, ammunition dumps. The idea was not just to damage the fort, but to decapitate its leadership and shred its ability to coordinate a defense. Step 4. Loudspeakers. Finally, Patton showed his eye for psychological warfare. He ordered loudspeakers brought forward. The Germans inside would be told exactly what was coming, not as a threat, as a schedule. At this hour, artillery bombardment. At this hour, airstrikes. At this hour, ground assault. Give them a night to think about it. Give every soldier inside time to decide whether the Major's "you'll have to kill me" was their wish as well. The assault would begin at dawn. Not for tradition, but so the Germans would spend the whole night knowing what sunrise meant. As darkness fell, the loudspeakers broadcast surrender terms in German, explained the schedule, explained what American artillery and air power would do at first light. Inside the fortress, the most fanatical might have been inspired, but many others would have spent those hours staring at the stone ceiling and wondering whether they really wanted to die for a road junction. Doubt had time to grow. When the sun rose, the artillery opened fire exactly on schedule. Not random volleys. Coordinated barrages aimed at specific sections of wall and bastions. The goal was not merely to shell the fort, it was to dismantle it. Foot-thick stone can take a lot of punishment. Patton had brought heavy guns specifically to deal with fortifications. Shell after shell slammed into the same sectors until cracks appeared, then holes, then breaches. German artillery tried to reply, but American counter-battery fire was fast and accurate. A German gun would fire. Within minutes, American shells would be landing on that battery. Crews quickly learned that shooting back was almost a death sentence. After roughly 2 hours of sustained shelling, the fortress was already scarred and shaken. Then the next phase began. The air strikes arrived as planned. P-47 Thunderbolts roared in with 500-pound bombs and rockets. They were not carpet bombing a town, they were hitting specific targets that artillery observers had already identified. The Major's command post took multiple direct hits. Ammunition storage areas were struck, detonating in secondary explosions that rocked the entire fortress. The main gate was blasted off its hinges. Through all of this, the loudspeakers continued. They described what was happening. They explained what would come next. And they repeated the same offer. Anyone who wanted to live could walk out with hands up and would be treated as a prisoner of war. At first, no one moved. Then a few small groups emerged from damaged sections with hands raised. Then dozens. The Major tried to stop them. He reportedly ordered that soldiers who attempted to surrender be shot as traitors. But that only accelerated the collapse of morale. Men realized they were trapped between American firepower and their own commander's fanaticism. By mid-morning, the fortress was a wreck. Walls breached in multiple places, artillery positions knocked out, the command structure shattered. Then American infantry went in, not from one axis, from every major breach simultaneously. Sherman tanks rolled up to point-blank range and fired directly into openings and embrasures. Engineers with flamethrowers cleared bunkers and galleries that still showed resistance. Demolition teams collapsed remaining strongpoints. Remarkably, this was not the chaotic street-by-street fight you might expect in a fortress assault. It was almost mechanical, because Patton's artillery and airstrikes had already removed most of the organized defense. German resistance was scattered and uncoordinated. Some pockets fought briefly, then surrendered. The major's threats to shoot deserters no longer meant much. There was barely a command system left to enforce them. American forces moved through the complex section by section. The loudspeakers moved with them, broadcasting surrender appeals in German, reminding the defenders that anyone who laid down arms would live, and anyone who kept fighting was choosing suicide. The major himself was found in what remained of his command bunker. He had barricaded himself with a handful of loyal soldiers. When Americans breached the position, he reportedly aimed his pistol at them. An American sergeant shot him, not after a speech, not in slow motion, just a professional end to a live threat. The major had said Patton would have to kill him to take the fortress. That is exactly what happened. The handful of soldiers with him surrendered immediately. They had followed orders to the end. But once their commander was dead, they had no interest in dying too. From the start of the bombardment to the final surrender, less than 12 hours passed. American casualties were minimal. A few wounded from sporadic German fire, no Americans killed according to some accounts. German casualties were heavy. Roughly 200 Germans killed, many by the bombardment. About 300 wounded. Around 1,000 surrendered once it was clear the fortress was lost. Patton toured the fortress the next day. Officers with him later said he showed no gloating, no celebration. He was matter of fact. "The major said we'd have to kill him," he remarked. "We did." That's what happens when you challenge people to do what they were planning to do anyway. But Patton also used the tour to make a point. He visited wounded German prisoners. He ensured they were receiving proper medical care. He had American medics treating German wounded side by side with American casualties. He wanted his own soldiers to see that once the fighting stopped, they treated prisoners humanely. This was not a contradiction. It was his philosophy. Be ruthless in combat, professional in victory. Destroy enemies who insist on resisting. Respect enemies who surrender. Never blur the line between the two. Word of what happened at the fortress spread quickly through both armies. For American troops, the message was simple. Patton would use overwhelming force when necessary, but he would always try surrender first. The German major had been given opportunities to save his men. His death and their losses were the result of his own choices, not American cruelty. For German forces, the story was more chilling. It was not that a fortress had fallen. Fortresses fell all the time in 1944. What shocked them was how completely and how quickly this one was taken. How Patton had taken a defiant challenge and treated it as a binding contract. How 12 hours of coordinated firepower had turned a strong position into rubble. Some German officers later told interrogators they surrendered to American units specifically because they had heard about this fortress. They understood that when Patton's Third Army offered surrender, refusal did not lead to a heroic standoff. It led to overwhelming, predictable destruction. This was psychological warfare at its most effective, not bluff, not propaganda, just a reputation for meaning exactly what you said. Looking back, it is worth asking what the German major's defiance actually accomplished. He had wanted to defend German honor, to show that not all Wehrmacht officers would surrender meekly, to make the Americans pay a price. What he actually did was get around 200 of his men killed, 300 wounded, and the rest sent to POW camps, for a position that held out for less than 1 day and delayed Patton's advance by maybe 12 hours. If he had accepted the first surrender offer, all 1,500 of his soldiers would likely have survived the war. They would have spent the rest of it in relatively safe POW camps, and many would have gone home to their families. Instead, hundreds died or were maimed. The fortress fell anyway. The road junction was in American hands by nightfall. Patton's advance continued. This is the brutal arithmetic of war that idealistic commanders sometimes forget. Heroic last stands make gripping stories, but against overwhelming force, they rarely change outcomes. They just increase casualties. The German major thought his defiance would make the Americans hesitate. Patton did not hesitate. He just applied more force. There is a leadership lesson here that goes far beyond the battlefield. When you make dramatic statements, "You'll have to kill me," "Over my dead body," "I'll never surrender," you had better be ready for your opponent to take you literally, because some people will. Patton was one of those people. He did not treat defiant speeches as bargaining positions. He treated them as statements of preference. You say you prefer death to surrender. All right. That can be arranged. The German major learned this lesson too late. Some of his men learned it at the cost of their lives. Other German commanders heard the story and chose to surrender when given the chance. The fortress fell in September 1944. The German major died there, as he had promised he would. His name is barely remembered. The exact location of the fort matters less than what happened there. What matters is the lesson. With Patton, dramatic defiance didn't buy time. It just changed the intensity of what came next. Some commanders might have felt insulted by "You'll have to kill me," and tried to prove they weren't monsters by offering sweeter terms or by staging a cautious, casualty-averse operation. Patton took the words at face value and acted accordingly. There is something almost coldly logical in that. The major stated his terms. Only death would make him yield. Patton provided those terms efficiently and, from his point of view, professionally. For us today, it raises uncomfortable questions. Should Patton have tried harder to persuade the major? Or was he right to take a fellow soldier at his word and not waste lives on someone who had already chosen death? Is there something almost respectful about granting a clearly stated wish, even when that wish is fatal? The answer likely depends on your view of leadership and responsibility. What is undeniable is the outcome. The major said, "You'll have to kill me." Patton did, and every other German commander who heard the story learned to be very careful about what they said to Patton's negotiators. Because with Patton, challenges were not deterrents, they were permission. Do you think Patton should have tried harder to avoid killing the major? Or was the major's death his own responsibility? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more stories about leadership, responsibility, and the consequences of dramatic statements, subscribe to Last Stand History. See you next time. This video is for historical education only. and does not glorify war or support any political ideology.